Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel where today I have the privilege of talking to Mr. Henry Sledge. So without further ado, Henry, how are you, sir?
I'm good, Josh. I'm good. It's a Saturday morning, and that's always a good thing. How are you doing?
I concur. It's a Saturday, and it feels good to have this work week behind me.
For sure. But glad to be here and looking forward to a good conversation.
Superb, excellent. Well, I think the first thing that we could cover is before we get into the details of your father's story, Pacific, and all that.
hmm
I wanted to ask you what is what's keeping you busy with this topic right now? I know you're writing a book. How's that going?
The manuscript is it's written. Third draft is done. I am currently looking for an agent. And we were both when you came to see me at the We Have Ways Fest in Northamptonshire. John McManus and I had the opportunity to spend a lot of time strategizing because John is my number one confidant and advisor and um, mentor, if you will. Although Saul David fills that role too. I'm sure you are familiar with Saul David, just
Yeah.
a phenomenal British military historian and just a great guy, and a very good friend of mine. And so I've talked to him also, and my manuscript is written, and I am looking for, with the help of John McManus, I'm trying to find an agent right now because I've decided I do want representation, and John McManus has very kindly offered to publish it through University of Missouri Press,
Okay.
and it would be part of the American Military Experience in World War II series. And I'm sure they would do a beautiful book. But John, being the kind of guy that he is, he wants to help me find a publishing home for it that we all think is best. And I think, um, I mean, I certainly have to pay homage to him and thank him. And I may go with University of Missouri Press. I can't promise I won't, but right now everybody kind of wants to investigate possibly like W. Norton or something like that, maybe at a more national level. And and so that's a process. And look, I mean, I've never published a book, so I'm trying to feel my way through it. But Richard Frank, who is, I think, scholar historian number one when it comes to the Pacific War, is also he reviewed my manuscript and gave me several suggestions, which I implemented. And so he is a friend of my family, a personal friend of mine. My father thought very highly of him, and he obviously thought highly of Sledgehammer.
Hmm.
And so Rich is trying to help me also find an agent. So where that goes from here, it's still a little bit foggy right now.
Yeah. Is the final draft complete?
It is. It
Oh
is. I
wow.
mean, it's look, you can always, and this is what I'm learning here. I was going to go back. My wife is actually reading it now, and she's making uh, syntax corrections and things like that. But I wanted her to read it just for her perspective because I value her
Yeah.
opinion. Um, Saul David was when I Zoom called with him a couple of 2 or 3 Saturdays ago. He said, "Look, you can spend from now on trying to dot every I and cross every T. Let's go ahead and move this thing along and try to find an agent for you, and let's get it in the pipeline and get the process. Let's get that ball rolling." And John McManus agreed. So, when I get to that point and find a publisher, and hopefully that won't be too far away, I mean, then just the critical mass of that process will bring in an editor who will then, start to really uh, get this thing tightened up but as far as the manuscript, I have finished writing the manuscript.
Superb. So we're not. It's close then. It's
I wouldn't say that. It's too early
no.
to say it's close. I mean, it's not a short project. I mean, it's 286 pages type single space, but a lot of that material is, the heart. I've said all along, the heart of this book, the heart of this project. Saul David says it's bad luck to call it a book until you have a publisher. The heart of this thing is the material that I extracted, the unpublished material that I extracted from my dad's original manuscript.
Okay.
That's really the driving, the heart and soul of this project, is to bring that material to life. So a lot of my manuscript is the unpublished material from the original manuscript of With the Old Breed.
Okay. And was that your motivation to write, or was there, for you, was there a more personal motivation that you wanted to convey his relationship with you, you know, as his son? Was that your motivation, or was it just there's extra stuff here that I want people to know about?
The two are indelibly linked. You know, my mother's the one who inspired me. She has sadly passed on. November will be a year, but she said, just in a conversation we were having this month now, 2 years ago, she said, you know, that your dad's original unedited manuscript is in closed papers at Auburn University Archives, and it would just be, I think there's enough material there that you could do something with that. So that, you know, that was kind of the nascence of the whole project. And I thought about different formats, different ways to do it. My brother and I talked about an enhanced version of With the Old Breed, but we decided that this is a classic in its own right. You know, we don't want to alter that. So I decided that the thing to do would be a companion piece with, you know, highlighting that unpublished material, and then using my voice to as interstitial tissue and kind of string it all together, and also provide backdrop and context and memories of the conversations that we had when I was a kid. So, you know, because I literally grew up, as you know, as you've heard me speak, I grew up watching this come to life. So that's my project in a nutshell.
Oh, that's perfect. I mean, I for one, I mean, I probably speak for many other people here, but I am very, very keen to get my hands on your material, because, you know, this story is very close to my heart for
Sure.
for various reasons, as you know, and I do find myself, when I read through the Old Breed and China Marine, I do think to myself, oh, I wish I could just ask a little bit more about this detail, or a little bit about that detail. And I'm sure your book, your manuscript as it is now, will provide us with that material. But while we're on the topic of writing a book, one thing I'm not clear on is, what was the original motivation for your dad to write With the Old Breed? Because I feel like I've heard, well, I've researched and I've heard from yourself, it was, he wrote it so that you, your brother, your mum would know what he went through, just as a, hey, FYI, this is what I did, and, you know, just keep it in the family. It's not going to go anywhere. It's just for you guys to say, hey, here it is. I think the Wikipedia page on your dad, it says, I've got it written down here, at the urging of his wife, Sledge began to compile a memoir of his war experiences as a way to better help him cope. So one side says, hey, it happened, just keep it in your family. The other side is, oh, he was, you know, he needed to cope with it. Which one was it?
Well, it was a combination of both. You know, he had the outline, he had the notes in his Bible, as they portrayed very accurately and I thought very beautifully in the Pacific miniseries. He kept the notes on little pieces of paper in his Bible. I have the Bible, the actual Bible he carried in combat. I can show it to you if you would like.
Yes.
I probably already have.
Yeah, we saw it last time, but I'll see it again.
Okay. So he kept those notes. When he got home, he made that into an outline, which he then began writing his manuscript from. I think he was driven to do it initially, as my mother started to type it, which that came in later years, she saw that it was very powerful and suggested that he should try to get it published. You know, I've through when the Pacific was being made, of course, that was 2010 when it came out. There were a few more veterans still around at that point. We went to some events. I had a couple of old guys come up to me. I was the one told your dad he needed to get that published. And I was like, no, you're wrong. You're not the one who told him to get it published. My mother is the one who inspired him. So let there be no misunderstanding on that. You know, people just come up with stuff, Josh. They get to an event and I think something clicks in their brain and something rolls off the tongue and they don't even think about what they said. But no, my mother is the one who inspired him to try to get that published. It was going to be a manuscript. It was going to be extant in some form. It's just she was the one who started to type it because he asked her to. My dad wrote things out longhand on yellow legal pads with pencil. He didn't know how to type. And
oh, really? Okay.
He asked her, will you type this? Well, she didn't really want to do that. And he said, well, if you don't, I'm going to have to pay somebody to do it, you know. And so she reluctantly agreed. And then, of course, got over the initial reluctance and became a driving force behind With the Old Breed. She typed the first part of the manuscript. The second part was typed. As the project gained momentum, he got a grant from the University of Montevallo where he was employed. And then his secretary typed the Okinawa part of the manuscript.
Okay, yeah. Okay.
But to your original question, it was very much a catharsis. You know, it was very much he was driven to divest himself of what was inside emotionally by writing it all down. He also felt driven, I think, to tell his perspective, what he could tell of K-35's story. There were a lot of things. I mean, it's, you know, it definitely was not. I mean, there were some memoirs written in the wake of the Pacific, which were, and I'm not offering opinions on those memoirs, but that was just, hey, let's ride the wave while we can. Let's get a little recognition for, you know, well, I'm going to try to get a little bit of this fame and recognition on the back of the Pacific miniseries, you know. But my father's book was the initial dry, and that's kind of getting off into that's going down a rabbit hole, as Paul Woodadge would say. But the motivations were, you know, it's never just one thing. I mean, he did want to have record for the family, but it was also a cathartic experience as well.
Okay, so, well, for him, deployment ended in 46, coming home.
Yeah, he came home February of 46 after being in China.
When the writing process, when did pen first hit paper?
Well, he wrote his, and I've seen a digital image of it because it's in the archives at Auburn University, where he wrote an outline of all the things that were notes.
I think I've read that, actually. I think I found that on the archive.
You can see it. You can go to Auburn Archives website and see, you know, they have pictures of a lot of this stuff.
If I find it, I'll put it on the screen now.
You should really, because it's pretty cool. I mean, that is literally, you know, well, the Bible is the Genesis, no pun intended. And there's not a lot of actual writing in the Bible itself. There's only about 2 pages of actual writing in the Bible. It was mostly on scraps of paper, you know, that he tucked into the Bible. But that outline, he did that probably not long after he got home.
Okay. Because you've said it was a cathartic process, and there is, I don't think there's any way for an individual like myself to fully comprehend the psychological and emotional and physical toll that what he did had on him. And
I'm right there with you on that.
Yeah,
I can't imagine.
I guess maybe this isn't a question you can answer, but how did he get through the days, the weeks, the months, years between 46 and the publication, or the cathartic process of actually getting it from here, writing it down? And because I know that there is um, there is, relief can be found in writing things out, or speaking things out helps relieve the internal pressure of stuff.
Sure.
He hadn't done that. How did he
Mm-hmm.
get through all those years? Because I think he says in China Marine he had regular nightmares for 20 years, and that I cannot imagine. I can't. Well, that's it. I can't imagine how he got through it.
Well, to answer that, I mean, I can draw upon, part 10 of the Pacific shows it pretty well.
Mm.
Because, and I want, they did their, they did their research pretty well for that. But I mean, I had conversations with them being the creators and producers and writers and so forth. Um, he told me, that, and I think he says this in China Marine, that initially he did a lot of just sitting around staring at the wall, just still, um, shell shocked when, of course, that's an antiquated expression going back to World War One, but then we, of course, now would call it PTSD, although back in the 70s and 80s, and I don't think really the 90s either, people really didn't use that term. I'm
No.
not sure when that term came into being, but that's what it was. I mean, he was just trying to psychologically convalesce from this life altering experience. How did he get through it? Well, he drew upon inner strength. He followed the advice. He always told me that he credited my grandfather with a lot of it, because my grandfather, and again, you've read this in China Marine.
Yeah.
I don't think this is anything that no one's heard before. My grandfather said, read good books, keep your mind engaged, keep your mind involved. Alcohol is a good servant, but a bad master. It's okay to consume alcohol, just do it in moderation. Don't let that become your crutch. Um, again, I have spoken and I've written about it in my manuscript. I mean, my father was an absolute master of his own emotions. He compartmentalized things. Later on, when he and my mother got married in 1952, and my brother came along in 57. I came along in 65. I mean, I think by the mid 60s, of course, he had a little more behind him as far as knowing how to compartmentalize. But I just know that he was a firm believer in, you don't inflict your angst on your family. That doesn't mean that you don't talk about it and try to deal with it in a healthy. That doesn't mean you keep it all bottled up inside till one day you just go crazy. That's not what that means. What it means is, if you've had a bad day, and he always used the expression, because everybody in my family, we always had dogs growing up. We have dogs now.
Yeah.
We're big dog lovers. He said, you don't come home and kick the dog. That was some people who, they would go to work and have a bad day. Well, here comes the dog when they get home to love on them and be devoted to them. And they're mad and they take it out and kick the dog. And it's kind of a figurative expression, but it can be literal as well.
Yeah.
And my father was just rabid about not doing that, about dealing with things in the healthiest, most productive way possible. He could have been expected to just hate the Japanese people and the nation, the entire nation of Japan post World War II. I know he struggled with a lot of that, but that was directed towards the ones that he fought and the ones who were shooting at him. I know he spoke more than once to me about not hating modern day Japan, because that's a destructive emotion and it doesn't accomplish anything. Now we're really kind of, I think, going tangential to what we need to be talking about. But I will say he had a tremendous amount of respect for Japanese culture and Japanese discipline and their dedication to accomplishing a job. Or, I mean, back in the 80s, man, Japanese car. My parents had Japanese cars because my father looked at it, and I write about this in my own manuscript. I mean, my first car was a Honda CRX, and I asked him, "Does this?" And he was happy to ride in it. He thought it was a great car, and I said, "Excuse me," I said, "Does this not bother you?" And his attitude was, "It's a consumer product, and American cars are shit right now."
Straight to the point. Very pragmatic.
Very pragmatic, ever the pragmatist. But to Hugh, to your question, I mean, not. I mean, sadly, I think a lot of World War II veterans succumbed to the dark side. And it could not just World War II veterans, veterans of any survivors of any horrible experience. It can overrule. It can take over your personality and your psyche in a very negative way, or it can, if you harness that energy and work to make things better, it can be a very positive thing. I think in my father's case, it was a positive thing. I know, science, he was at heart a scientist. How you doing, bud?
Yeah.
My son just walked in. What are you doing?
I'm taking these.
Okay. He, believed firmly in harnessing your emotions and doing productive things. I mean, now, him pursuing a PhD in biology, obviously that occupied a lot of his time. But it was a very wholesome pursuit, and I can only echo what he's turned that light on if you need to.
That's not.
What he said, science was his salvation.
Yes, I've heard you say that a few times about him. I think you are right in saying that it's tangential. We could go off down that rabbit hole. Maybe it's a conversation for another time.
Mm-hmm.
But you've said quite a lot there about not hating the Japanese nation, and if anybody on the planet had an excuse to hold a grudge, he did. And again, conversation for another time maybe, but I think there's a lot there to unpack that we could learn from in today's world.
Sure. Love you, mate.
Yeah, we can go there another time. But yeah, the character of your dad, I just I find him, well, the whole reason I'm talking to you now is because I find him inspirational in some senses, given my personal circumstances and what I've had to deal with. And this next question is one that I'm just curious to know if you could answer in his stead. But I was listening to a podcast you did with, I forget the bloke's name, but he is a veteran of Afghanistan, I think. He's got his own channel. I forget his name.
I know the one you're talking about.
Yeah, the way you told the story was he had a guest on, and he said to the guest, this serving USMC, and he said, "Is there anything you'd want to say to Henry?" And this guy said, "Are you aware that your dad has godlike status in the Marine Corps?" And I guess what I'm curious is, if your dad were to hear that, what would he say? Would he care? Would he say, "Oh, ridiculous"?
He would be, well, he was a self-deprecating guy.
Yeah.
He would, I think he was amazed, Josh, as the years, a book is a slow burn. You don't, like, you're a music guy, right? Haven't we talked about? I'm a music. I love rock and roll, man. Classic rock. I love music. You know, when AC/DC put out Back in Black, man, they knew pretty dadgum quick they had a winner. You know, it's like the second best-selling album of all time, for good reason. You know, Johnny Cash. I mean, when Johnny Cash put out a good record, I'm pretty sure do
Johnny Cash
pretty quick. Yeah, I'm pretty sure they knew pretty quick, hey, this is going to be a world beater.
Yeah.
You know, a book, the same thing with movies. You know, a book is different. I mean, and he didn't write the book or try to get it published for reasons of, you know, trying to aggrandize himself or get famous or make a lot of money, because you certainly, that's not what you do, you know, writing books. But it was, like I said, you know, my mom and then other people who began to read the manuscript saw the power in it and suggested to be published, and it, my mother being the main inspiration, it did get published. Well, then people began to, for lack of a better term, people began to jump onto the bandwagon, you know, because I think they saw, I mean, really, and look, in ensuing decades now, we're up to 2023, you know, there have been dozens and dozens, hell, probably hundreds of memoirs that have been written. You know, it's not like he did something nobody else ever did. I mean, Robert Leckie, you know, published Helmet for My Pillow in 1957. Great book. I love, you know, I reread it last year. I'll probably reread it again this coming spring. But I don't know. I think my father was, when people would say the things about it that they said. I mean, I'm looking at the cover blurb that Tom Hanks himself said, more than a legend, Sledge turned the extremes of the war in the Pacific, the terror, the camaraderie, the banal, and the extraordinary, into terms we mortals can grasp. Tom Hanks. Yeah. You know, he would, of course, he long since passed on by the time that happened, but I just don't think he understood it. You know, my mother would read some review of the book or read some accolades that someone had written about it, and he would just sit there and shake his head. You know, I think he asked her, because she and I talked about this. I mean, hell, I heard him say it myself. You know, what is it about that book that just, you know, that people can't, you know, that just amazing? What is it about it? I mean, my father said, I don't get it.
Did he ever? Did it ever click for him?
Maybe it did, Josh, but here you have to understand, Eugene Sledge was a guy who had no ego. Okay? I can't emphasize that enough. And if ever there was someone who could have been egotistical, it was him. I mean, forget about getting a PhD in biology. I mean, forget about being a brilliant academician. I mean, he gave modern culture something that we want to believe will never go away. I mean, I'm amazed. My wife, me, you know, my mother, even until she passed away here not long ago, it never ceases to amaze us that the book just seems to have legs that just carry it on into perpetuity. I think Bruce McKenna, I think I've asked that question to Bruce McKenna, who, of course, was one of the main writers and producers of the Pacific. Hang on a second. Hey, Jeff, would you refill my coffee, please? Please. Man, try to get a 15-year-old to do something. I appreciate it, man. Thank you.
I don't even know how to use it. I'll figure it out.
All you do is pry the top off, pour it directly from the pot into the cup. Thank you. And get you a teenager.
It's all right. It wasn't that long ago. I was one.
I know. What was I saying?
The book had. Why does the book have the legs that it does? How is it?
Well, so I asked that question to some of the Hollywood people like Kirk Sadusky and Bruce McKenna, both very dear friends of my family, and huge admirers of my father's work. And what they always say is it was his humanity. You know, and I don't know. I guess maybe I take a little of that for granted because that he was my model, you know, for I mean, I some of the memoirs that have been written, particularly off the back of the Pacific miniseries, there was a little bit more machismo, self-aggrandizement. Thank you, Jack. I appreciate it. Got it. There was more of that self-aggrandizement and just macho, if and I'm trying not to call out names, but there was none of that with the old breed. Now, you know, he was a 60 millimeter mortarman. He would never try to tell you that, I was a hero. That just, God, that was so anathema to his psyche, to his personality. I mean, he looked at it like they were all just put into this hellish, Stygian existence, and they had to somehow find their way through it. And you had some guys who were machine gunners. You had guys who were artillerymen, on 105s. You had 60 millimeter mortars. You had 81s. You had riflemen, BAR men, flamethrower operators. I mean, everybody had a job, and I think he just related what happened in such a emotionally, nakedly honest way. I mean, Bruce McKenna said, I mean, in a conversation I had with him not long ago, he said he doesn't blink. I mean, he tells you exactly what happened. There's no, it's just in your face. Here's what happened.
Yeah. I think, yeah, I would absolutely concur with that analysis of why the book has had the impact it has, and I would say certainly from my perspective reading it, it is it's the raw humanity of it that speaks through, and I think it's material that this day and age needs more than it realizes, I think. And while we're talking about, how your dad developed the book and the content in there, was there ever a point in your life with him as your father? Was there ever a moment where he just sort of he sat you down and he said, "Hey, and he just sort of drops these nuggets of wisdom on you from the life that he lived and the life that everything that he learned based on his experiences"? Were there ever moments where he would just come out with things that would just sort of, slap you around the head and you're just like, wow?
Oh, well, yeah, certainly. Some things I don't want to get into because I wrote about them,
Sure.
And I'd like to kind of keep that for my project, but I've shared a lot, I typical kid, I complained about things. We all do. It's human nature, if I complained about a meal that was not to my liking, I remember one time at breakfast, he reminded me of how they had, I think my toast was not toasted exactly the right way, and I bitched about it, and he reminded me of having bread with weevils in it, and on Okinawa, and or he just tried to never complain, and he really was amazing about not complaining, because when you've had it at such a bad level, it's easy to not complain. Whereas for those of us who, if our coffee's not heated just right or something, it's we don't have that life experience to draw from. But yeah, I mean, his World War II experience informed so much of how he lived his post-war life.
Yeah, and I know he writes a little bit about that in China Marine, and as you know, I've highlighted a huge amount of the content from both of these books. But if I look at China Marine here, like I've not got a huge amount highlighted in the front here,
Uh-huh.
But towards the back, there's a lot of stuff at the back of China Marine that I've highlighted as sort of golden content for myself, and
Mm-hmm.
his yeah, it's just his journey back to civilization. And he does write about how he was shocked at how people would complain that their coffee wasn't hot enough, or stuff like that. And it's content like that I find very helpful to read, because it helps me to appreciate the things that I have in my life a lot more.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the kind of golden stuff that I try and carry with me every day, and that's stuff that I've learned from your dad, your dad's work anyway. But if we can move on a little bit here, I would also like to ask you about the individuals that your dad served with, and their place in not only his service life, but his life after the war. And am I correct in saying that Sid Phillips was Uncle Sid to you?
Yes. He, of course, had been my dad's best friend growing up in Mobile. Yeah, after post-war, Sid going to medical school, my dad going to graduate school, getting married, raising families. There were a lot of years of losing touch, but yes, Sid was always Uncle Sid to me. When I was really young, we went to visit him down in Mobile a few times. Great memories and of course, we reconnected with Sid when the Ken Burns, the war came out in 2007. And not only that, but reconnected with the Phillips family quite a bit during the run up to the Pacific miniseries. And fittingly enough, Sid's son, Sidney, is a Baptist preacher, and he officiated my mom's funeral last November.
Mm.
So, a lot of connection between the two families. Sid was just a wonderful man, and the whole family is just wonderful.
Are you still in contact? Is your family still in contact today?
Yeah, I mean we are.
Yeah.
It's not like a regular thing. I mean, Facebook kind of connects everybody, but no, the whole family is just wonderful. They live mostly in the Mobile area or very close to there. Sid has grandchildren, and great grandchildren.
Yeah.
Now, but yeah, man, that was just a beautiful personal connection.
Do you have what sort of age were you when you were hanging around Sid?
Well, I don't know that I would ever say we hung around Sid, but I was probably we went to visit him in Theodore, which is not far from Mobile, a few times when I would have been, back in the mid 70s. So I would have been, 8, 9, 10, 11, something like that.
Okay. And was it later on that you met Snafu as well?
Yeah, I met Snafu in 1984. I grew up, of course, knowing, and I've spoken about this, and because you've listened to the things I've been on. Snafu was almost a household word because my dad talked about him a lot, when I was growing up. Met him in 1984. Now, at this point, with the Old Breed had been out for 3 years, give or take. And Snafu had happened across a copy of it and read it, and of course, he's a star character in the book. So he and his wife came from Louisiana, drove to visit my parents, and I was, I'd grown up with the history of all this, as I've said many times, but I didn't know it like I know it now. But I do remember the day I met him. You know, I walked in, he and his wife were in the living room, and my dad introduced us, and you know, I shook hands with him, knew of course who he was. I look back on it with regret. I wish I had just sat down in the room, you know, just to listen to them talk. But I was a 19-year-old college student. I had other things on my mind. You know, I mean, it was a very polite, respectful introduction, and I was happy to meet him. And, you know, but I had other things on my mind.
Yeah.
I didn't sit in the room with, and I think another time my parents drove over to Louisiana to visit Snafu and his wife.
So that was that the one time, one and only time, or were there others?
I think that would have been the one and only time of that. But now they talked on the phone many times. I will say this on the end card, one of the end cards of the Pacific, it says that I think it says when Snafu passed away, my dad was a pallbearer.
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
Okay. That's actually, my mother said that's actually not correct. So
Right.
I'm not sure. I mean, obviously I know when my dad passed away, Snafu passed away in or I guess the early 90s, but um, I don't know where that, you know, where we thought that happened. And I don't know. I mean, I just know my mom said that actually was not correct.
Oh, okay.
Now, and remember, I mean, when Snafu passed away, I would have been, I want to say 1994 is what sticks out of my mind, but I don't know.
Okay.
But look, at that point, I was a young guy trying to, you know, I wasn't married yet, didn't have a family of my own. I was trying to make my way in the world, and
Yeah.
I had other things on my mind. So you know, oh, Snafu passed away. Mom and Dad went over to the funeral. Dad's going to be a pop. That's not something I would have been that aware of at that point in my life.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
That does make sense. Yeah. One detail that I would like, personally, I would like clarity on from reading with the Old Breed is when your dad writes about Peleliu, the impression I get from reading is that even though your dad doesn't mention Snafu all the time, the impression I get is that Snafu's always next to him. He's always in the vicinity. Whereas on Okinawa, it reads as they're a little bit more separated. Were they always together in the same on the same mortar, or were there times when they were split?
I think there were times, especially on Okinawa. I know there was another guy named George Surratt that he dug in with quite a bit. I know on Okinawa because there's a lot more of this in the unpublished material, which, you know, obviously for obvious reasons, I don't want to, you know, give too much of that away, but there's more of Snafu in that, but there's a lot of George Surratt too. The answer to your question is, yeah, they were separated sometimes. And I mean, I don't know. That's just me. I've never lived through that experience. So,
sure.
You know, I do know in Okinawa up around the Half Moon Hill area, they had an OP, an observation post. And I know that my father, and I think George Surratt as well, alternated in calling in fire because of their experience as mortarmen. They were then used in the OP quite a bit. And we kind of see a little of that in the Pacific, but they have to compress it and make it really quick, you know.
Yeah.
You know, like that where they have the scene where Sledge calls in a couple of rounds, and then we see the Japanese charge. Well, that is actually supposed to be, if you're drawing from the book, the Half Moon Hill area, and they spend a lot of time there, and the place is just if I could, Josh, there's a couple of paragraphs I'd like to read just for context.
Yeah.
But yeah, he was dug in with George Surratt quite a bit there.
Yes.
So, but yeah, go ahead.
Just want to connect the dots here. George Surratt, is that the guy who he approaches your dad, and they had some sort of order? He was told to do something that he was convinced would kill him, and he had a moment with your dad where he just opened up, spilled everything about his life because he thought it was over. Is it the same? Is it the same individual?
No, I think I know what you're talking about, but I don't think it was George Surratt.
Okay, all right.
I don't want to just bog things down, but
No.
the talking about the Half Moon Hill, Okinawa area, because we talk about Peleliu so much, and rightly so. But there's a couple of paragraphs here on page 253 of With the Old Breed that just resonate with me. And so this is in the Half Moon Hill area of Okinawa.
Yeah.
And the Half Moon Hill area was the eastern terminus of the Shuri line, I believe. The western terminus would have been, or the western anchor point would have been Sugarloaf Hill, which, of course, is much storied, much written about. It was an iconic fight, but that was the 6th Marine Division, not the 1st.
Sure.
But maps and unit names, let's not, we want to talk about, what seems to make an impression with you, and I hope your viewers, is just the power of what my dad wrote. And just a little bit right here, let's just take a gander at. The mud was knee-deep in some places, probably deeper in others, if one dared venture there. For several feet around every corpse, maggots crawled about in the muck and then were washed away by the runoff of the rain. There wasn't a tree or a bush left. All was open country. Shells had torn up the turf so completely that ground cover was non-existent. The rain poured down on us as evening approached. The scene was nothing but mud, shell fire, flooded craters with their silent, pathetic, rotting occupants, knocked out tanks and amphibious tractors, and discarded equipment. Utter desolation. The stench of death was overpowering. The only way I could bear the monstrous horror of it all was to look upward, away from the earthly reality surrounding us, watch the leaden gray clouds go scudding over, and repeat over and over to myself that the situation was unreal, just a nightmare, that I would soon awake and find myself somewhere else. But the ever-present smell of death saturated my nostrils. It was there with every breath I took. Last little paragraph here. I existed from moment to moment, sometimes thinking death would have been preferable. We were in the depths of the abyss, the ultimate horror of war. During the fighting around the Umabrogel pocket on Peleliu, I'd been depressed by the wastage of human lives, but in the mud and driving rain before Shuri, we were surrounded by maggots and decay. Men struggled and fought and bled in an environment so degrading, I believed we had been flung into hell's own cesspool.
Yep. And interestingly enough, I have highlighted that very paragraph there.
Yeah, that is such a powerful passage to me.
Yeah, I mean, I struggle to find the vocabulary to describe what your dad portrays, and I do sometimes wonder to myself, could I, if we could recreate that now, just the description of the stench, could I now be soaking wet, covered in mud, sitting on the ground with whatever filth is around, could I handle that? And it's that kind of thought where I do my best. I mean, I'm probably not doing it justice at all, but I try and put myself in your dad's position, and I think, having experienced this, how can this now influence my life now?
Well, I think so, because that's a segue into what I'd like to, that what I just read there is massively depressing. It's
well, yeah.
If you let it, but here's the thing, and this is where the power of what he wrote can be turned to a positive.
Mm-hmm.
I read that, and I mean, look, any of us who if we don't get a good night's sleep, the next day is just going to be a little bit tougher. I certainly deal with that. If for some reason I didn't get a good night's sleep, my next day at work is going to be that much harder to get through. Imagine about 2 weeks worth of no sleep at night, taking enemy fire, being rained on, not getting any decent food, being filthy. You know, I can't, all those things compound. Imagine all of that and having to try to survive and maintain some veneer of sanity. I mean, I can't get there, but it makes me appreciative of what men like that went through, number one. But number two, to try to uplift and get to a more cheerful tone here, you know, we can take this and be appreciative of that and be thankful for the fact that I have nice, clean, hot coffee to drink, or clean drinking water, or a great meal, or clean sheets to sleep on. And so I keep that, you know, in mind. It's not about delving down into the negativity, but it's seeing how bad it can get and then allowing yourself to go to a more positive place mentally. You know, and I know that my father made that choice to be positive, you know, and not be drawn down into the negativity of it. I know that he made that choice, and he did it beautifully well, because I mean, I write about it in my own manuscript. I mean, you know, much has been said about how he struggled when he came home, and that is true, but he had an incredible sense of humor. We had a great family life. He and my mom had a wonderful marriage. I'm not saying it was perfect. I mean, there's no such thing as a perfect marriage, you know. Anybody who tells you it is living in a little fairy tale, man, because it's not supposed to be perfect. We're not perfect creatures. I mean,
that is a semi segue, I suppose, into I want to make a separate content for my channel. I want to do a separate video on the phrase that I've heard my entire life. You've probably heard it as well, where our society now, we describe the generation that your dad came from as the greatest generation. We've all heard that. And I've been mulling it over in my head for a couple of weeks now, thinking about it, and I wonder if we talk about this generation that your dad's from like they had some kind of magic ingredient or secret ingredient that has since been lost to time, and we will never have a generation that was as great as they were. And this is partly, I sent you what I wrote a couple of weeks ago about the way I've been thinking about your dad, and I wonder if we ought to change the way we approach your dad's generation, because if we talk about them like they had some secret that we've lost, we're denying ourselves the ability to live with the gratitude that I think we ought to have, like you've mentioned, you know.
Right.
You know, your dad simply did what needed to be done.
Well, yeah, let me speak to that. So,
yeah,
if I agree with that, the greatest generation, all the generations that we, you know, there, I know a lot's been written about that, a lot's been said about it. If I agree with that, I'm disrespecting every man and woman who wears a uniform now.
Yeah.
The way I look at it, every young man, every woman out there who wears Marine Corps uniform, I'm disrespecting them if I say, well, they were the greatest generation. Everybody now is just a watered down version of that.
Yeah,
and I don't want to
else is subpar.
Right. And I don't want to do it because I don't think that.
Yeah.
And your listeners and viewers need to know that. I don't think that. You know, what I will say is that the people out there wearing the uniform, the Marine Corps uniform or any uniform, I've never been in the military. Okay. I've never humped a pack and a rifle. I'm very open about that. There's no way I'm going to disrespect them or insult them, you know. But to speak to what you just said, let me couple of closing paragraphs here with the old breed. It's ironic that the record of our company was so outstanding, but that so few individuals were decorated for bravery. Uncommon valor was displayed so often it went largely unnoticed. It was expected, but nearly every man in the company was awarded the Purple Heart. My good fortune in being one of the few exceptions continues to amaze me. Now we're really getting into this, can be applied to everything. War is brutish, inglorious, and a terrible waste. Combat leaves an indelible mark on those who are forced to endure it. The only redeeming factors were my comrades' incredible bravery and their devotion to each other. Marine Corps training taught us to kill efficiently and to try to survive, but it also taught us loyalty to each other and love. That esprit de corps sustained us. Until the millennium arrives and countries cease trying to enslave others, it will be necessary to accept one's responsibilities and to be willing to make sacrifices for one's country, as my comrades did. As the troops used to say, if the country's good enough to live in, it's good enough to fight for. With privilege goes responsibility. Now, and that's the end of With the Obry. One thing that immediately in there is that absolutely my favorite picture of my dad ever, him in his dress blues. He says here, when he says, until the millennium arrives and countries cease trying to enslave others, it will be necessary to accept one's responsibilities and be willing to make sacrifices for one's country, as my comrades did. Notice he doesn't say, as I did. He says, as his comrades did, because knowing my dad the way I did, he's talking about his buddies who didn't make it home. Because to him, they made the ultimate sacrifice. Does that make sense? So, I mean, they all made sacrifices, but he says, as my comrades did. When he wrote that, he was probably thinking about all his buddies who didn't make it home and have a chance to live life after the war.
Your dad is not the first veteran I've heard say that. I've seen many an interview with a veteran, and the interviewer says, "You're a hero," and they cut them off immediately and say, "No, I'm not a hero. All the guys that died, they're the heroes. I'm just lucky."
Yeah, that's been said. I mean, that's I'm not trying to say that like that's never, like that's brand new.
Yeah,
that's been said before, but I probably said this to you, Josh, in our previous conversation. I mean, I know when when the Pacific was being made, some of the Hollywood guys asked me. It was actually James Mall, a filmmaker, James Mall, who interviewed me in 2004, and he interviewed my mother as well. Was your father a hero? Now, and I write about this in my own manuscript, but I've said it before, so it's not like it's something I'm trying to hold back. I say he was a hero to me because he was my dad. He was a 60 millimeter mortarman who did his job. It just so happens he wrote an incredible book describing that experience of what he and a lot of guys went through. He would have never held himself up as some kind. I mean, he was a Marine who did his job, man. It was never about being a hero, and I just think that's a crucial component to the Sledgehammer legacy, was his lack of personal ego, his lack of desire to aggrandize himself.
Yes, that comes through very clearly in his writings, and I think personally, that is why his book has had the impact it has, and it's led to, well, at the We Have Ways festival, I mean, you were sitting there signing your father's book, and
that's a weird feeling.
Yeah, I mean, how did you feel in that moment?
Well, my brother and I talked about that after I got home. He's been asked to do that too, although not as much. And World War II is not really his thing. But like me, he is very passionate about our father's legacy, but he also knows World War II is my area of interest, and he's, being the gracious guy that he is, he's happy to let me carry that on forward. But we talked about that, and I just, I don't feel worthy of doing it, but I'm not going to tell people no, because, I mean, I've been assured by so many people. I mean, I think I had this conversation with Peter Caddick Adams, delightful British military historian, who my wife and I had some great time talking to him the last day of the We Have Ways Festival. And Peter Caddick Adams has been on World War II TV with Paul Wadadge a lot and just written some great books. One of which his book on Battle of the Bulge. I'm looking forward to getting stuck into here before long. But I said, Josh, I probably signed 80 copies of With the Old Breed. Probably 30, however many people were in the line. You were in the line after I talked, but on 2 occasions after that, the bookshop guy, and I can't remember his name, delightful gentleman, asked me if I would sign some stock for them. And of course, I agreed to. And that was not people lining up buying it. It was just him bringing me cases of books to just put my name in. Peter Caddick Adams assured me, he said, Henry, you have a pedigree here that no one else has. You are a living link to Eugene Sledge, to Sledgehammer. There is value in you signing his book. I don't, if other people want to believe that, then fine, I will sign the copy of the book. But, there's always that disclaimer. I feel like I should sign it and have the stamp that I put on there. I wasn't there. I didn't survive this. I didn't write this. I didn't go through this, So I do it humbly, I guess.
No, I think we've talked about it before. What is the significance of I think you've said to me before, you are not the only son of a veteran. There's loads of guys out there that are sons of veterans. So why is it that your dad's story? Why is it you individually? Why you, basically? And it's a good question. And if I were to share my opinion on it, I would say it's because the humanity that comes through from your father's work comes through you as well. It's like it's a continuation of the same theme, and you're keeping that history, you're literally keeping that history alive. And that, I think, is why there is such a hunger for this. And that's why, like you noticed, there were young guys in the line.
I was just about to say, that was the coolest thing about it, Josh, was to see, here, it's one thing to go to like a gun show or an event. You're going to see the 50 plus, the 60 plus, folks who show an interest in this. That's always going to be there. And I certainly don't want to not give credence to that. But it's what really excites me is to see these young guys, and occasionally young women too, who have an appreciation for this, because they're going to drive it forward.
Yeah. It lives on.
Well, we hope so.
Yeah. It will. And from what I'm reading, from what I'm understanding with my personal circumstances, there is value in the content. I made a video not that long ago where I said that, the advice that your grandfather gave your father,
right,
even though it's 80 something years old, doesn't matter. It's still applicable today. It's still valuable today. It's still true today. And I think that's the priceless part of it all. That right there is it. Doesn't matter how old this story gets. It is
right.
It's humanity. It's raw. It's real. And may it live on.
May it live on, indeed. And I'm so happy to see the Pacific trending well on Netflix, because I think it explores some of these themes in a way that Band of Brothers did not, beneath the rim of the helmet, if you will. Band of Brothers, as great as it was, and I loved it, I think it almost had a jingoistic feel to it, which is probably why I don't think, that's going off down another rabbit hole. I think the way we just said it, Josh, is probably a great way to wrap it up.
Yeah, no, we can wrap it up.
We'll wrap up this conversation. I'm not opposed to another conversation.
No, absolutely not. I will ask one. Hopefully, this is a very quick answer for you. One last thing. You've mentioned the Pacific, and previously you've said that you were going to do a watch along series of the Pacific where you watch it and talk about it at the same. Is that happening?
Well, yeah, yes, it is. That's always so. I actually just last week or the week before, I did a video with my co-host of What's the Scuttlebutt, which, as you know, I'm kind of I'm on a hiatus from. But Don, the producer of that show and the host, my co-host, or I'm his co-host, he's the main driving force behind What's the Scuttlebutt, wanted to do with the Pacific doing so well on Netflix. We did a watch along of, I think up through the first 5 or 6 episodes. I can't remember how far we got, but he is editing and doing all the production work on that to get that out.
Okay.
And then we'll maybe do another one. I don't know. And we, watched along, commented, discussed it. I know that my friend Jared Frederick he does a show called Real, I think it's Real, REEL, Real History.
I've seen that,
where
yes.
he
Yep.
does this kind of thing. We have discussed multiple times, because Jared's a really good guy, a really good friend of mine. I really enjoyed his book on Dick Winter's letters. Jared was going to come into town with his producer and do a similar thing. I don't know when that's going to happen. I thought we were going to do it this fall, but I haven't heard anything from him in a while. So, but more than once we've talked about doing something like that, so yes, I mean, it has happened. It will happen again, if that's a pretty convoluted answer.
No, that's perfect. That's perfect. All right, well, we'll wrap it up there for now. Thank you very much for your time. I really do appreciate it.
Sure.
And we'll have to catch up again soon.
Yeah, well, let me know how things go with this, and let's definitely keep the discourse going, man. I appreciate your interest.
No, I appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
You bet.